You were quite exposed to these issues relating to foreign-born nationals and their proclivity towards women, in particular
Yeah.
underage women, when you was actually quite young yourself. So tell us
Mhm.
a little bit about where your story sort of began with this.
So I would say it began when I was around 14. I believe I was year 9. And I lived in a very quiet village, somewhere you would never expect anything like this to happen. And there was an Eastern European man. I can't pinpoint exactly where he was from. I was very young. Accents didn't come naturally to me back then. But he would kind of wave past me every morning, kind of give me a wave, you know. And me being naive and younger, I kind of smile back. I didn't really know what to do with that. You know, my town was quite friendly anyway. My village, sorry, was quite friendly anyway. So everybody would say hello and things like that. And then it became kind of a persistent thing where the waving became stopping and trying to communicate more. I mean, this man must have been in his like 40s, I would say, maybe mid 30s. But it became a case of he wasn't waving anymore. He was stopping in various places that I would walk past on my way to school. And this was going on for about 6 weeks. And back then I didn't really think too much of it because I kind of knew it was strange, but, you know, as far as I was concerned, that was none of my business. He was on his way to work. And then he started stopping in newer destinations, closer and closer and closer to my school. You know, I don't want to go too deeply into this because we'll be sat here all day, but basically, one day on the way to school, there was an alleyway next to Tesco's, and he attempted to grab me, and I don't know what he was saying entirely. This was a very long time ago, but he attempted to grab me, and I managed to kind of squirm my way out. And I mean, I'm 5'2" now. I was a very small child, you know, and I feel like, yeah, it just wasn't an ideal situation for me. I could have been a lot worse off, and I kind of ran away and I ran home and I called my mum when I was running. And so yeah, that happened. The police came over, and the police suggested that we do the same thing the next day, but the police were following me this time to school to ensure that he wouldn't apprehend my journey again. Then when he did it again, because he kind of tried to speak to me in the exact same place. He didn't grab me this time, but he tried to talk to me, and, you know, he was getting very close to me. The police stopped and spoke to him. At that point, I was taken away from the scene, and the police came back to me and said, well, he actually thought you were 16, which is why he tried to, you know, speak to you. And I said, but he didn't just try and speak to me. He tried to grab me, and he essentially, at this point, we'd kind of realised he'd been stalking me for weeks, right? So I kind of explained this all to the police. The police said there was nothing they can do because Tesco's doesn't have CCTV. Don't know about that one. And apparently there wasn't enough CCTV footage to do anything about it. But the bottom line is he grabbed a child on a village high street where there would have been plenty of CCTV to show this. He continued to ride that journey, and actually my parents got him sacked from his job because they spoke to his job and explained what he had done, and they'd agreed that he was in the wrong. So the fact that his job had actually got rid of him kind of shows that they weren't going to put up with that behaviour as well. And that's kind of where it started, pretty much.
I mean, as an ex-cop, it's really upsetting to hear that the police didn't take the action at the time, because just from an investigation standpoint, granted, this was a long time ago, things have moved on since then, but it still doesn't excuse what happened. You've potentially, well, you've been stalked, you've been followed by somebody who you don't know, who was over 3 times your age, and they've tried to make conversation with you, and it's escalated to the point where they've hidden preemptively, knowing you were going to pass there, and then they've taken hold of you. I mean, thank God you managed to get away, because God knows what could have happened.
Yeah.
So there, straight away, you have stalking, and you have an assault or an attempted sexual assault, but we'll say assault. So then what we have is the police turn up. The police then say, essentially, we can't be arsed dealing with it because we can't prove it straight away. We don't want to have to investigate it. Now, thankfully, things have moved on since there. But so they just let this guy go, and
Yeah.
it took his employer, a complaint being made to his employer, for him to then be fired, to safeguard you and to other people. Do you know if this was happening to anyone else, or did it just seem to be an isolated thing with yourself?
I'm not too sure. As far as I'm aware, it was just myself. It could have been happening to other students. I mean, many students would walk that same route. You know, I say the same route, partly the same route. The route where he first stopped was not the route that everybody else would take because it was quite close to my house. But then as obviously he got closer and closer to the school, everybody kind of takes that route. So like he could have, I don't know. You know, the school were alerted after this happened, and there was an assembly about obviously being careful and stranger danger and kind of all this stuff.
So Morgan, that happened when you was younger, and have you had any other experiences in your adult life in relation to, in particular, foreign nationals?
Yeah, I have, and as I've gotten older, I've, you know, noticed that there's a slightly different demographic of individuals. You know, for me, it's mainly Asian men. You know, Asian and Black men. If I'm being honest. And you know, I moved here about 5 years ago, and I never had a problem. And then probably around November last year, it started to get a bit rife. You know, a few issues going on. The road that I have to walk down to get to my house is incredibly multicultural, to the point where there's actually nothing English or British about that road. So it's hard because often when I walk down that road, I can be the only female at times. I can also be the only white person. And in the mornings, it is absolutely horrific. You've got gangs of young Asian men kind of stood in alleyways and on corners. And I've kind of suffered that walking to and from work, being touched, kind of pushed. They kind of push their bodies into me as if they're redirecting my journey, almost, if that makes sense. I know that sounds odd, but I don't know how else to explain it. And then on the way to the train station, kind of in the train station, being filmed, having my picture taken, people on FaceTime. You know, I made a 5-minute journey once and suffered 4 different attempts of whatever they wanted to do. It's crazy. It's, you know, and it's, funnily enough, in the area since Reform actually took over this area, it's gotten better. There's not been as many situations as there were back in November, back until probably like March, April, May time. Actually, probably within the past 2 months, things have been a little bit better. There's been a few incidents. Don't get me wrong, I had 2 European men the other day, actually, kind of catcalling me and shouting at me across the street, which I did catch them on video. So it's kind of, you know, it's here and there, but not an everyday occurrence since we had, you know, a different council come in. But it was getting incredibly bad. It was getting awful.
So when you raise these kind of issues, because you essentially you advocate for women's safety, you want women to feel more safe,
Yeah.
and my own partner and my own, you know, my sister and my mum, I want them to be safe, and irrespective of the culture or the background or the skin color of someone who's making them feel uncomfortable, either way, it's wrong.
Yeah.
But you have noticed a particular prevalence in relation to, you say, particularly Asian men and Black men. What kind of reaction do you tend to get when you say that?
Not a very good one. I mean, you know, usually from women who have had. Sometimes I get surprised. Sometimes I'll tell women, and they're like, "Oh my god, you know, that's happened to me too." And at that point, you realize that there is a huge problem, and you know, But there are certain individuals that just will not accept that and throw the, oh, well, white people do it too. And we know that. But everybody else raises that white people do it, but nobody raises that other people do it. People ignore, the other demographics of individuals, the other ethnicities, because they don't want to appear racist. We're only pointing out what they refuse to point out, right? It's not one rule for one and one for another. So usually it's kind of a 50-50 reaction. I would say 50% of the time it's, a reaction where individuals agree, but the other 50% of the time it can be, you're a Nazi fascist, you're this, you're that, all that good stuff.
I thought part of the whole thing in relation to the grooming gangs was that was allowed to fester and allowed to be perpetrated as viciously as it was, because the services were scared of calling out the race of the perpetrators due to fear of being racist. And then following them looking into it and everything else, they then said, okay, regardless of the race, we are going to call it for what it is. That's
Yeah.
basically what you're doing. You're saying, look, we can focus on this part of the problem over here, but we all know about that. We all know that, there's white people that do it and there's British people that do it. By you ignoring the problem, this section of the problem, you are actively continuing the very blind ignorance, the willful ignorance, which caused the grooming gang scandal in able to fester and ferment the way it did. So I can imagine it's actually quite frustrating for yourself that you are raising these issues, and because it is attached to somebody's culture or a different ethnicity, you're being slammed, you're being called a fascist, and that's a racist. When essentially all you're doing is you're doing exactly what the system should have done initially in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I put something on my Instagram recently saying that I was going to be speaking to you, and I said, "Women, what issues in relation to your safety do you face in Britain right now?" And I had a few people message me, and one lady she's a runner. She's able to look after herself. She's fit and strong, more than capable of handling herself. And even she said that essentially, where did she write it? I'm a runner. I get continuously catcalled when I'm out. I'm training for a marathon, and I'm very worried about running my own in the winter months. Now, she doesn't specifically say a race or a particular demographic, which are the highest proponents of perpetrators for this kind of behavior. But what you're saying, it is echoed by other people. But as soon as somebody tries to attach a race to it that isn't white, you're called a racist. Now, that's a big, if we want public safety, we have to call it for what it is. We have to say, regardless of black, white, Asian, green, whatever, there is a serious problem here and this needs to be addressed exactly how we see it. In relation to what you're